The meaning of God is increasingly informed and significantly informed by the tradition of secularism. Holyoake is the coiner of the term secularism for this school of thought. And its sources are especially the Enlightenment, the modern project of blazing a new trail towards human knowledge, where the word God gets some of its meaning, some of its secular meanings, comes through very influential intellectuals of the 19th and 20th centuries who are named the Masters of Suspicion. It's a good term. The Masters of Suspicion refers to people who gave powerful, plausible, thoroughgoing critiques of not just God, but of all kinds of things, all kinds of convictions and axioms. They trained the West to be suspicious of itself, of its own motives, of its own language, of its own thinking. And these voices have trained us to think of God in ways that people didn't think of 500 years ago. And those are in our heads. These folks are in our heads. They're in Christian heads as well. Sigmund Freud claimed, here's how we arrived at the word God. As children, we came into a world that was too big and complicated and powerful, and we were at its mercy. And we depended on others to just stay alive, for food, for a roof, for comfort, for emotional well-being. We need our parents. And at a very young age, people treat their parents as all-knowing, as all-powerful, as all good. And later, as they grow up, they learn that their parents aren't all-knowing. They aren't all-powerful, and they're not all good. And that leads to a severe existential crisis in the life of every human being who grows old enough to experience it. What are you going to do when you find out that you are not in someone's all-powerful, good hands? What do you do when you find out that it might not be all right? We construct a new parent who really is all-knowing and all-powerful and all good, who really is going to make it all turn out all right. And we push that construction beyond our senses, and that means beyond our reach to destroy or to disprove. And we have our father figure. And that gives us emotional security. Unfortunately, it also enslaves us. Right? It postpones our maturity. It postpones our adulthood. Because it lets us remain inner children. Or a variant, it's actually earlier than Freud, was Friedrich Nietzsche, probably the grandfather of the Masters of Suspicion, who said, we constructed a belief in God and in good and evil and all the rest to basically hand over our wills to something else. But since there is no God, since there is no good and evil, all there is will. The one who really knows himself or herself will acknowledge it and exercise the will and become a superman, an Übermensch, rather than a slave, rather than a weakling. He was contemptuous of Christians because we always looked to someone else to be our guide. And we would fail to exercise our will. So between these two, what does the word God mean? It means a coping mechanism that prevents us from really attaining our humanity. Another master of suspicion is Karl Marx. For Marx, God is a way that the strong manipulate the weak. God is a means of justifying the use of power. If I own the means of production, the farm, or if I own the factory, according to Marxian economics, to maintain that ownership, I have to exploit my workers. I have to pay my workers less than they're worth, because otherwise I'd go out of business. Owners hold power over non-owners, over workers. And resources that we have at our disposal as owners are things like police, armies, laws. Laws to prevent so-called theft. Of course, if I'm exploiting the workers to get the stuff, they're not really stealing more than as much as they're recovering what's rightfully theirs, right? I'm the one who's stealing by paying them less than they're worth. And the workers of the world need to take what's rightfully theirs. They need to unite. If there's enough of them and they gain enough power, then they're going to overthrow the system with its laws and its armies and its police forces. Unless we can convince them, not just that it's harmful to them to steal, that it's too big of a risk to take if they steal, but if it's wrong to steal. In fact, if it's a sin to steal. If we convince the workers that God will punish them for stealing, then the real police force is going to be in their heads. And they'll be better workers, better employees, better serfs, better citizens, and we'll stay in power. That sounds pretty negative, if God just punishes sin. God also rewards fidelity with heaven, with eternal bliss. Pie in the sky when you die. And so between the stick and the carrot of the law and the gospel, we can maintain the system that advantages the owners. That's the Marxian critique of religion. He says it's the opiate of the masses. What he means is it's the anesthetic, it's the painkiller of the masses. It desensitizes them to the injustice of their situation and keeps them from taking history in their own hands. That's who God is. This runs in different flavors all through liberation theology. It might be economic classes, it might be owners that use religion to exploit workers, or it might be men who use a patriarchal religion to dominate women, right? Do you ever wonder why God is male? Well, because males are powerful, that's why. Or allows white people to dominate black people in America. Watch the movie Malcolm X, or read the book even, for a liberationist critique along those lines. Okay? When you hear terms like race, class, gender all put together, those are Marxist terms, and those are in a relationship together because of the influence of this school of thought. Feuerbach predates Marx with a little bit more fundamental critique that Marx was able to use. He believed all there are human beings. I mean, all there is the real world. And God is a kind of ideological projection of personal categories and personal values. We look at the world and we tend to personify it, right? So if you're an old school polytheist, the sun is a god and has a personality. The moon is a god with a personality. Love is Aphrodite or Venus. War is Mars, etc. We tend to do this. You probably personify things like your car and your computer and your phone. Even before Siri, we're still shouting on our phones, expecting them to listen because we just project our kinds of traits onto things that aren't like us. Feuerbach said that's how God got started, was the projection of human thinkings and human categories onto nothing. maybe onto stuff like idols, but the best example of this, the purest example of this, is the construction of God out of nothing but abstractions. Knowledge becomes omniscience. Power becomes omnipotence. Presence becomes omnipresence. So we get God from our own human quirks and habits of projection. Michael Shermer will make an argument like this, that it's quirks of human intelligence, which were very valuable in earlier pre-human evolution and early human evolution, but that have given us the byproduct of religious thinking. Emil Durkheim, one of the fathers of sociology, argued that one of those most important human institutions is the community itself. The group is all important. We're tribal, familial, social animals. We're not loners. We don't live on our own. We're not individualists as a species. We're communitarians as a species. That's why you came to Westmont, for the community, right? Durkheim says yes. Humans do everything for the community. At the same time, we have the habit of taking local community and privileging it over other communities. Our tribe over the neighbor tribe. Our country over the neighbor country. Our party over their party. Page over Clark. Clark over Page. Yeah? The Dodgers over the Yankees. This is just basic anthropology. That human strength comes in groups. And humans lend strength to groups to fight other groups who band together for strength against us. And this is how we get competition. And this has huge evolutionary advantages, right? Because competition breeds greater and greater success. And a symbol of the group is a powerful source of group unity. So USC has the symbol, the Trojans, to help focus an image in the minds of the members of the University of Southern California so that they serve the group more with greater focus, with greater commitment, with greater solidarity. For Durkheim, looking at tribal religion all over the world, the god is the symbol of the group that becomes the focal point of the group's power and solidarity. Your city has a patron god or goddess. Your family or your profession has a patron god or goddess. And loyalty to that god is really loyalty to the group. So who is God in America? Well, it's America. When a Republican or a Democratic candidate for president says, "God bless America," what they're doing is they're giving us a symbol that stands in for the whole, that recruits us more powerfully and uncritically to the group itself. This is why in Rome you had to worship an image of the emperor. I mean, good grief. This occurred to people. So God is the group. These are just a few of the voices who have been feeding into a kind of counter-narrative of suspicion towards the word God that claims that God means something other than it seems. That the word God is being used in a disingenuous or misleading way, tricking us into thinking something's there that isn't, or doing a kind of bait and switch and giving us one thing under the name of another. I'm spending more time on this one because I think this one's a more powerful tradition right now. It's certainly growing in strength in our intellectual circles. It's certainly recruiting more and more of the people who formerly would have been cultural Christians, maybe not strongly Christian, but weakly Christian. It's recruiting more and more of the indifferents. And it's recruiting some true believers themselves. And vice versa, of course. Maybe when I was describing that, you were getting an uneasy sense that, gosh, maybe that's true. Is that true? Some useful questions to keep in mind are things like, where are the sources of these ideas? Where are the sources of these critiques? Henri de Lubac is a 20th century Catholic who wrote a brilliant book called The Discovery of God, who argues that one of the real powerful sources of this school of thought isn't really the power of the notions themselves, so much as Europe's cultural setting. And he and others show that the impulse for this argument really comes from exhaustion over religious conflict, particularly the wars of religion. When Protestants and Catholics, or rather Protestant states and Catholic states, got involved in interminable wars and couldn't settle through either intellectual means or military means, the question was of who was right. And that exhaustion and that disillusionment fed into this sense that Christianity isn't helping. It's not helpful. In terms of these people themselves, the personal lives of most of our modern intellectual secularists had a lot to do with forming their worldviews and shaping their imaginations. Most of the people I've just mentioned suffered personal tragedies shortly around or before as they were formulating these theories. And they lost children or spouses, or suffered in other ways that left them, that affected them, that affected their imagination. That doesn't discredit automatically that doesn't discredit their arguments automatically, but it points to something that's significant, which is that these aren't objective neutral accounts any more than the others are. They're coming from somewhere. The next question I would like you to consider is, what are the fruits of secularism? So Nietzsche's out to free people and strengthen them, and Freud is out to turn us into adults who are well-adjusted, and Marx is out to bring justice and equality and power, shared power to the world. Feuerbach is out to make us authentically human so that we don't just keep pushing our own humanity off on something else. Is that the result of secularism? Does it produce that? Does it yield greater freedom, greater justice, clearer critical thinking, and better mutual understanding? My answer is yes and no, actually. I think it's a mixed bag. I think a lot of the same intellectual vices and personal vices that they visit secularists as well as non-secularists. And then two final questions. First, are they valid? Are these people right? Is Freud right? Is God a crutch? Now, we're at Westmont, so you know the answer, right? Well, but is God a crutch? Is God sometimes a crutch? Is God sometimes a way that people, a construction that people set up so that they'll avoid taking matters in their own hands or just taking the responsibility that is rightfully theirs? Is God a tool to keep powerful people powerful and keep powerless people powerless? Well, at least sometimes that's the case, isn't it? I'd like you to really consider these arguments. Because if they're true, and to the extent that they're true, we shouldn't have anything to do with that God. I don't want you to dismiss Shermer or Wilson as you read them. I want you to pay attention and to consider, where are these people right, not just where are they wrong. And a final question, where does this leave the people who use the word God, people like me who are teaching meanings of the word God, and students like you who are exploring and hoping to learn the meaning of the word God in a truer way?